Hello everyone, this is Blender Guppy. In this video, I'm going to remake this model here using the Random Flow add-on. We're not gonna get the same shapes probably because everything is randomized. And this is the same model that I posted in Instagram and Twitter, the station model. And this is how it looks like rendered in cycles. So this video will include the modeling and a brief explanation of how the material shaders work. But for the camera, you can see that the model itself is not moving. It's the camera that's actually has the shake animation. There is a bunch of tutorials in YouTube, and you can search for it on creating animating the camera so it looks like it makes the um simple still animations look more realistic. Okay, so gonna start by deleting the the previous randomized mesh, and so we can begin anew. Okay, um, delete, and this is the base mesh. So basically, it started out as a cylinder with 64 sides, and I just extruded it to create this shape, and then I used auto mirror to mirror it in the X, Y, and Z axis. So there's a separate video for the auto mirror. Be sure to watch that. And let's start modeling this. Or let's start randomizing some objects. So so what I'd like to do is just create 1 to 3 layers. You can create 4 to 5, 6 layers. Just be careful about the amount of faces that you've selected because it can slow down or freeze the operation. So I'm gonna start out with these faces here. Go to object mode and use random loop extrude. And I'm gonna pick one of these operator presets. So this presets does not come with the add-on. You have to save it yourself. So basically, this is the settings that you'd like to use mostly. But for random loop extrude, I'd advise you to turn this off first before using the plus icon to create the preset. So it's kind of like this. So it's using this preset here. You can see that it changed the other property values, but I don't have the loop objects turned on. So even if I have 6 or 5 or my subdivision here in the base cuts is higher, it will not immediately take effect because the loop objects are not activated. So if you saved it with the loop objects activated like this one, and if you have very high base cuts here or subdivision for the source mesh, then if you activate it, it will of course take a long time to process and complete the operation. So if you're saving a preset for the random loop extrude, be sure to turn this off first and then use the plus icon to create that preset and then press OK to save. Okay, so I'm gonna start off with And also, why don't I just select every face in the mesh? And that's because um, this is already too much, and this will slow down the process and leave me with a lower subdivision cuts to play with, because the of course the resolution that I've selected is very high. So let's just randomize the mesh on selected sections instead of all of the faces. So why did I select this from um, so I'm going to select these faces. So the reason I've selected this is because of the wrap around. So it will wrap around this, and instead of stopping here on the sharp angle and then creating another randomized section here, selecting another set of faces here, I want to have the option to join these edges here, like this one here. Basically, the randomized faces or islands wraps around the sharp edges. So when selecting sections and you want to use the wrap around option, then you have to select the faces just beyond the sharp edges, or just past the sharp edges. So, okay, I'm going to use 1, 2, and 3 loop objects. And I'm going to use individual solar path and original only. So original only, all of the loop objects are being sourced from the source mesh, but with this off, also wraparound only works with original only. So with this off, the loop objects are being sourced from the previous loop object. So 2 is being sourced from 1, 3 is being sourced from 2, and so forth. So with original only, the loop objects are only being sourced from the source mesh, and changing loop 1 object will not change the loop 2 object. Whereas if I turn this off, if I change the loop 1 object, it also changes the loop 2 object, because loop 2 object is being randomized from the loop 1 object. Okay, so with the new version, original only will be on by default, and there will be a bunch of warning texts on if you switch this off and you have a high resolution coming from original only, you have to lower the resolutions first, the subdivision resolution you're using, if before turning this off, because it might slow down or freeze the operation. Okay, so wrap around, and I'm going to copy this, Control C and V, and increase the base cuts. So just follow me loosely, because we're dealing with randomization and we're not exactly going to have the same result. Okay, so you can see here the distortion. This is because of the wraparound feature. So if you use angle, so the distortion is gone. If we use wraparound, then we have this. So what is this? This is because of the island faces and the way they are made. So for example, this island faces here, and look at its shape. Okay, so this is the distortion. This is because of the shape of the face of the randomized mesh, and the way it's going to turn into sharp angles, sharp angled edges or faces, then sometimes it can cause distortions like that. So the way to avoid this is actually to play around with insip depth and the loop seed. So we can just turn the loop objects on and off to see what loop object is causing the distortion. So okay, let's change it or lower down the change the insip depth. Okay, so you can play with the loop seed or the insip depth to get rid of the um, distortion. And okay, so we're dealing with randomization, but we're also dealing with a sci-fi object. So what we're dealing with here is finding um, shapes that looks functional. We're dealing with chaos and randomization, but we're using the loop seed to find shapes that looks like it is functional in relation to the object that we're trying to model or create. In the PDF guide, you can find the redo menu, redo panel chapter, and that's where the all the controls are, and all the controls are included, and also how to use the redo panel. To bring back the redo panel, that's the F9 hotkey. Okay, so I'm actually liking the shape. So there are 3 layers here. So I'm just gonna add another layer, and this time going to use number 3, which is the longest path. So it's gonna favor the longest faces more when randomizing the islands. And bring this down a bit, 0.15, so it's lower than the previous randomized results. So we have distortion there. Let's play around with the loop section, loop seed. Okay, so let's try increasing the panel size and increasing this, decreasing the insert depth more. There we go. Let's increase the subdivision to make the lines thinner. So going higher, you can, based on the experience you have, or based on the machine that you have and your experience with it, when racing this, of course, 4 to 5. Now I'm at 4. I'm going to 5 is already slow. So going from 5 to 6, I know that it's probably gonna be take a long time or even freeze the operation. So I'm not gonna risk it. Instead of using the subdivision to make the faces smaller, I'm going to decrease the panel size to make the faces smaller instead, or the islands smaller. And of course, since we're dealing with the longest path, mostly the panel size has a greater effect on the non-path and lesser effects on the shortest and the longest path. Okay. So that's probably the theme that gonna follow here. Creating primary layers, then probably adding another one which is the same as the last operation I did, which uses the longest path. Okay, I'm selecting another section, and be sure that the selection goes past a sharp angle. Okay, going to add a face here to make the details bunch up here. So because the randomized result depends on the topology that you have, and it needs to be quads. So I started at 4. I'll probably reduce this to 1 first, then play around with the values, then start raising up the subdivision as I go. Okay, 2, 3. Then look for a shape that's um, look for a shape that's functional, that looks functional. So we're trying to see what loop object is causing the distortion. So that's number 2. Okay, let's increase the base cuts. And we have loop one object. Let's change that as well to and see what it looks like. So from the last operation, I made it 0.01. So let's get it back to 0.02 to make it stand out more from the rest of the loop objects. Okay, and go back to 1. Okay, we have overlap. So these are faces that have the same height and basically overlapping each other. So either play with the loop seed or the inset seed, loops inset seed. We get rid of that. If that doesn't work, then you might have to manually lower the loop depth property values. Okay. Let's see. Actually, let's save this as another file. If you still have overlaps after the operation, then you can just pull and push faces manually, selecting the faces and pressing Alt S, push it. Okay. But for little things like this, it doesn't really matter since they're going to share the same material anyway. Okay, so let's see. This is actually good. Let's try and create another set of, okay, selection. Let's use the same selection and let's add another loop object. And let's use number 3, longest path. So I'm just using, in Solver, I'm just using sampling. For radial, the paths are not going to use for you're not going to work for the radial. In the next version, probably I'm going to get rid of the fix the UI. So if you use radial, the path will not show up, so it won't be confusing. So you won't actually use it for, especially for new users, so they won't be surprised that doesn't work with the radial. The shortest and longest path doesn't work with the radial solver. Let's raise it up and increase the resolution. Use none, and in solver, use recursive. Each will have a different result, or radial. Radial, it works mostly or more optimally on topology that has evenly spaced or evenly spaced or um, square faces, evenly spaced square faces. That's it. Okay, 0.035 to make it extrude more from the mesh. Okay, I think we have what we want. So to be sure that you deselected everything before selecting a new set of faces, in edit mode, press Alt A before selecting a new one. So because these are hidden beneath all this randomized object, you might not see it sometimes. So just to be sure, every time you want to select a new set of faces for the randomized operation, press Alt A and select the new faces. Okay, I'm gonna include this because this is probably gonna be high resolution. Then I'm not gonna go past this because at the render angle I'm using and distance, we're not gonna see if this is if we have wrap around activated here. So I know that I've selected a lot of faces, so I'm going to lower this before activating the loop objects. So 0.02. And then we can start playing around with the base cut. So we have a bunch of splitting it down to two to make it lighter so we can adjust the overlap or deal with the overlap problem much quicker. Remember, we are trying to look for functionality amidst chaos. And remember that if you're following me, just loosely follow what I'm doing because we are dealing with randomization and you're not going to get the exact same shape probably unless you copied my topology. Then you have a bigger chance of coming up with the shapes based on the result, the property settings that I've set here. Okay, I think we can deal. Okay, press Alt A, and then selecting this one. Let's increase the panel size. Now we have to make the outer rings right here. So I'm going to use or extract that from the main object, from this part here. You can press Alt, right click to hover around the objects where the cylinder is. Alt right click and it will show you the select menu and show you the objects underneath the mouse cursor. So cylinder. So instead of hiding the objects and then finally seeing the cylinder, then you can just use Alt right click cylinder, pick cylinder from the list, and Shift H to hide everything, and then you have this. Then you can extract the faces that you need, and Alt H2 to select everything, and then pick the extracted faces and edit it. Or select the cylinder. So this is now our active object. You can still extract this from all this randomized mesh, and press X to see what are being extracted. I mean. So X-ray off, X-ray on. Okay, so press space, confirm, and then go to edit mode. So after the operation, the object selected will be the extracted mesh. So let's do the brace first, and control duplicate, Alt S, and then separate this as another object. Go back to this object, select everything and create a thickness, control F, then press S, or click on solidify, control F and S, and then F9 for its redo panel, increase the thickness, and delete the inner faces, selected faces, the inner faces, because we won't see it, and it's best that we just delete it. Okay. Control FS, F9. We're not gonna delete the inner ring faces because we can see the geometry, and we need this geometry. Okay. Let's mirror this. Pick the side of the mesh you want to mirror. XYZ. This is the real geometry. This is the mirrored geometry. And this as well. And if you're picking the axis, mesh, use the 3D widget here as a guide. These are real geometry. You can still use the same operator to switch it to any side that you want. So if you, for example, here, and you can see that the axis are already lit up. It's not white because it's already using the mirror modifier, and those axes are turned on. So if you press space, these are real geometry now, and anytime you use the operator, you can just quickly switch the real geometry side. Okay. Let's add loop cuts to make the to have the random operators play with a lot more faces. Okay, so create the bridge. What I did there is just scale it to 0 in the axis that it's facing to flatten it, and then I deleted the face because it's not gonna be seen in the render anyways. Okay, add edge loop, and then we're going to um create randomized detail. First here, 1, 2, and 3. 5% for the loop panel. Raising the percentage of the loop panel size, of course, makes the uh, face islands much bigger. Play around with the properties to see what shapes you want. So okay, so this is what I've chosen. Because it's gonna rotate, it's gonna have this. It's good that it has this kind of like detail that really matches the theme that I'm trying to look for. So because this will be moving, and this will also move. You have major distortion there. If you're not using individual solver path, then all of the loop objects will use the same solver and path right here. So shortest, I probably shouldn't have selected that because because the size of the faces and how many they are also affects uh, the speed of the operation. So you can see when I picked the shortest, it took a long time to process everything because of the amount of base cuts that I'm using versus switching over to none. So these shapes look good, but we have the distortion. So we're going to see what loop object it is. It's loop one object. Okay. And we have distortion here. Okay. These are really big shapes. Let's add another. Wait, this is. Let's try longest for the loop tree object. It didn't show up. Let's raise this up 0.03 to let's try 0.05 just to look at it much better. So longest probably not working too well with recursive. Okay. And reduce the base cuts. Set it down to 0.02. I think okay, I think we can use this. Still having to deal with the distortion. I think that's yeah, let's go with this and increase the subdivision. Okay. And let's build the rotating cylinders here. Cylinder. This is a bit tricky. Cursor selected and create the cylinder. So this is darker than this mesh here because we are in the vertex mode. Let's go to object. Set origins geometry and create bridge and delete the interfaces. Okay, auto smooth. And auto mirror X, not Y because we're going to mirror this here. Just X and Z. Select everything. Lower the subdivision and activate the loop objects. Let's set this to 0.01 to make it smaller. Okay, I'm gonna actually go with this, and I'm going to apply this. So right now, apply mesh doesn't work with multiple objects, or actually it does. So I just applied the mirror modifier because so I won't have problem using the array operator from Cuber. So cursor selected. I'm selecting these objects here. Wait, actually, to have no problems at all, selecting cylinder, cursor selected, and this one here, select set origin to 3D cursor and mirror, auto mirror, mirror axis not found. Okay, actually, it's just selecting the cylinder. There we go. Okay, set origin to 3D cursor, Shift D. So I've selected all of the faces. A and Shift D, Control M, and then mirror it. Set the orientation to the cursor, to the 3D cursor. We've already duplicated this. We're going to mirror it or flip it to this side using the 3D cursor as the pivot point. Control M, interactive. This is called interactive mirror. And click on the middle mouse button and pick a, okay, what's the, not here. So this is global. I press comma. Use this should be dot or period, and use this 3D cursor. So use it as the pivot point. Control M and click on the middle mouse button to select an axis, and then just move the mouse down. So if you move it to the x-axis, then it will use the x-axis. Or click on the mouse again and kind of pull it toward down where the z-axis is, not the y-axis. Okay, so these are all our objects now. And then I'm going to add an array modifier. I think this works using Cuber. I think this works with multiple objects. Origin, no. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4. Selecting this. Alt X, radial symmetrize, origin. Okay. And this has reversed normal. So we're going to fix it by recalculating outside. There we go. And we're going to select everything. and apply a randomized vertex color to the mesh. So I'm going to use my black and white. So instead of using color, I'm using just gradients of black and white. So basically, I just turned the saturation min and max 0. So I'm not using any saturation. That 0. And then the value is 0.5 in minimum and 0.9 maximum. So I'm just going to play with the value here, random seed. And then since this is the randomized vertex color is per object, I'm going to use per face island on the objects and use island offset of 2. So for every 2 islands, the color is going to change. Okay, this one. And then this is going to be used in the shader. So I'm going to apply the same shader on the mesh, Shift G, and press T, the same type as the active object, which is the mesh. And then Shift Alt Z, Alt Shift Z to get rid of the overlay. And Alt X, I'm going to use the material that I've used before. Shader, material. Okay, let's see. There we go. Okay, this is my material right here. Let's explain this. Okay. Simple Dirt. This is free in my Patreon. Patreon.com/BlenderGuppy. All of the posts are public and you can download of all those objects there. All the posts there. Some free blend files and also this Simple Dirt, and there's the Edgeware, which only works for Eevee. And then I'm probably gonna post the new Edgeware material or group node that I'm using for the recycles. I'll post it there also. And also Simple Dirt is right there, so go ahead and download that. It's for free. That means that you don't have to support me to get it. But if you want to support me, go ahead. Okay, so this is our randomized vertex color right here, attribute node. And if this additional menus here are because of the Node Wrangler add-on right here. And to install that, in preferences, just type, this comes with Blender, so you can just go to the Blender preferences in add-ons and type Wrangler. Activate it using this toggle here, and then Shift A, you'd have this option here, and this lists the vertex color in the object. So this is the name of our randomized vertex color. If you press this, then this is this one. So this is our vertex color, which is our base color. I added ambient occlusion to make some parts darker. Then on top of that, I multiplied the Simple Dirt to create the dirt effect, to basically break the smoothness of the surface of the model. Right there. This has a ton of uses. The Simple Dirt, you can also use it to create wear effects on fonts, and using the same color output to create influence on the mix shader to create an alpha. Of course, so it looks like the font is, some of the fonts are missing. Some of the areas of the fonts or the texture that you're using is missing, so it can be used for that. Okay, so I used it for color, and then the same thing for base color, and then the same thing I use for metallic and roughness. I use color ramp and then inverted it for the roughness. Just the basic setup. Then for the lights, here we go. For the lights, if we turn this off and turn this off, this is only going to use the random per island. This only works with cycles. It doesn't work with Eve. So if we go to the material preview, you can see that it's not working. So this kind of emulates what Eevee looks like. So in rendered in cycles, this is what it looks like. So basically the face islands that we have in the randomized mesh, they are being randomized using this, and with the color ramp, you can actually play around with that by adding a noise node, texture, white noise, vector, color, value, and math. No, it's not it. I think I forgot it my own shader. There we go. You can randomize this by adding the add math node, then the white noise, color, and then 1D. There we go. Just one dimension. And then probably the value, not the color, or the color and the value, or the value. Yeah, the value. And then wait. Yeah, value. And I then use J's placement texture, probably this one. Just make your own using the software. Just Google J's placement and J's placement, and you can see it in this site, J's windmill.art.net, and download the installer. You can also support the maker of the product if you want, and be sure to, if you want to actually support this guy, uh, do it, because this is pretty useful. Okay, so J's placement, if I activate it, and that results in this. So basically creates all those details, and only on the particular islands which have been filtered using the geometry node, the random per island. If we this is now our random seed, just like in the random flow operator, to basically change the islands that are being lit up, and the islands that are being lit up are then are then being multiplied by the J's placement texture to create the lights on those islands. And then we have this node here. Let's set it to 1. Node here, which is separate RGB from the normal. This means that the Z-axis, we're using the Z-axis because the XYZ is RGB, X is red, R is RGB, yeah, X is red, Y is green, and then Z is blue. So Z is blue, and I multiplied the negative, inverted the color. So if I unmute the node and look at on top of the model, you can see that the lights there are actually, this is too bright. Select something. Okay, the sun is probably the one that's too bright. Where's the lights? Okay, if I mute this, you can see that the lights are gone on top, and also here the lights are gone at the bottom. So basically I turned it off in the negative Z and positive Z axis using this method. So the lights only show up on the sides of the model, not underneath and above, because uh, it's actually, because it's this small, you're not going to actually notice the difference. But if I make the lights larger, you can see the result is that it's because the model is not UV'd and we're using the object mapping, then it results to this. So it's much better to have it on the sides than actually on the top and bottom, because the texture is not following the circular shape of the model. So we're going to turn it off. I use this method to turn it off on those axes. So turning it back to number 2, and then we have this. Then you can just play around with the lights here. I use linear. You can use constant or whatever. Constant. Yeah. And then play around with the seed. So I encourage you to experiment with nodes because there's a lot of things you can do with it. Shader nodes. And procedural texturing. I think that's the term. Okay, so let's select the lamp. 5, 1. Okay. So let's try and now animate the um, model. Let's start with this objects here. Okay, and I'm going to press space to activate the animation and then switch to the timeline and shift Q. Oh, wait, why is that showing up? Let's add, oh, we don't have an active object. Shift Q, random animation, and Z. Okay, cursor. That's it. And we're using a maximum of 100. So at frame seed number 1 in the rotation, or move and scale for scale. So these properties will not randomize unless you use frame seed and animation seed that's bigger, that's higher than 1. So at number 1, you can set it exactly as you want without being randomized. So you still have the option of using the operator to set the animation properties exactly as you want without the randomization effect. So rotation is, for rotation, um, it's going to be 0 to the um, maximum property you're using. So minus 360 is going to reverse the, but if you use random seed of higher than 1, then it's going to randomize the rotation for each of the objects. So we don't want that. So we have this. So let's make it smaller. Actually, not smaller, slower. 200 frames or even 300 frames. But be sure to mark the end to set the maximum frames to the maximum randomized frame. The maximum frame of the scene to the maximum randomized frame using the operator. And by the way, this is for the next update, Random Flow version 1.7. So I'm just demoing it here. So it's based right now, it's like 95% finished. Okay, let's deal with these objects here. When I used it earlier, I found some stuff that I still need to change. Okay. Random animation, rotate, and Z. You can choose multiple. Hit the mode, repetitive, continuous, or mirrored. So let's just use Z axis. Actually, I'm going to use this in the next project. This looks cool. We have the incorrect geometry, but that would look really cool. Yeah, let's just use this one. So what if we just reverse it, minus 360? There we go. And then let's stop the animation. Have an object that's going on the opposite direction in this part also. So shift left arrow to set the animation back to 1. Shift right arrow sets it back to the farthest to the maximum frame you've set for the scene. We're not going to rotate this because it's going to also rotate the bridge at the opposite direction. So selecting the proxy object right here, I'm going to instead extract the faces, X. Probably should have a hotkey here to select everything. Yeah, I should include that. And mirror it on the XYZ axis as well. Delete the bridge and use this for the randomization. So extract proxy number 2 and create the loop object, set it higher than the rest to make it jet out. Okay, that's good. Set a random vertex color, that's per island, and play around with the value. Wait, I still have the, so let's select the actual object that's created, random vertex color, island, and play around with the value. Okay, and set the shader using Cuber, and then play the animation. So this is the one right here, random animation. So instead of randomizing, we're doing the exact thing. Z, and this is 360. So it's going on the opposite direction. Okay, let's also rotate some of this part here and also in the other direction. And let's try and view this using Eevee material view. Too bad we can see it properly with cycles. We'd have to render the animation to see this. But if you want to look what it, if you want to see what it looks like, so videos, space station. This is the one I posted in Instagram and Twitter. So this is what it's going to look like. By the way, the spikes are used random scatter and use the cube option and just modify the z-axis scale to create the spikes. So, and then animated the camera to create some minor shakes. Actually, it's too strong. So next project, I'm probably gonna fix that. So that is our randomization. That is how I created the station object model, and then use this shader right here. So J's placement and simple dirt for my Patreon, and then this technique here, this method here for the lighting. So it's pretty simple. It's not that complicated. Actually, when I build nodes, procedural textures or nodes, I like it. I like to make things simple. As you can see in simple dirt, this also pretty simple. So I want the user, if I'm ever going to give it to another person, I want them to actually uh, understand quickly because it's pretty simple if they want to study it. And because I've seen some complicated setups, and some of it are actually repetitive. So my advice is build it roughly and then look at the node setup and find areas where you can just simplify it to make it because less nodes equals faster processing. Okay, so yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you learned something about how to use the randomization. I only use random loop extrude for this because of the nature of the model and how far it is, and of course the size of it. I didn't use, actually, if you want to use random panels on the uh, other parts, you can do that, but you have to quantify it first, of course, before using the random panels. Or when you're using random loop extrude on angular objects, you can just forgo the limited dissolve effect. quad slice, tangent, linked faces, linked flat faces. I have tutorials for this, for how to select it quickly. And then let's forgo this. This is faces too thin. Random panels, thickness, depth, cuts, and panel size. Then we can use limited dissolve to smooth the surface, and then play around with the seed, the solver, the path, things like that. Okay. So if your model needs to be rendered somewhat closer, then you need to create more um, more details that can be appreciated closely. Okay. But for this model that I'm using based on the render distance, then I just could forego those details because if they're too small, they can't be seen anyways. And if they can't be seen, then don't bother creating them. Okay, just to save time and geometry. But if your model needs to be rendered close up and far away, then you need to, of course, uh, balance the way you create the geometry that you need based on the areas that needs to be rendered closely and stuff like that. Okay, so that's it. By August, I'm going to post the uh, updates, which will include the random animation operator along with the normal picker. Normal picker will let you animate the object based on the rotation of the model. So median point, rotate this, and it operates on the z-axis. So these are indicator that this is the direction. Pick the normal, and let's extrude this. Random animation. It operates on the z-axis. It will point on the z-axis. Okay, what is that? Geometry. Okay, it resets the geometry. It resets the transformations besides the location, except the location. So Z, and then add parent and align to normal. So the mesh is not actually aligned to the normal. It is the empty that's being aligned to the normal. And the object is parented to the empty. So we get this. And why did I parent it to the empty? So what is the purpose of the parenting? If we don't have a parent and animate this in the z-axis, if we rotate this, it also messes up the rotation. So Alt R. So, but if we have a parent, animate this. Okay, animate and rotate the parent, not the mesh. Then the rotation is maintained, and then it doesn't mess up the animation, the transformation that we're using for the animation. Okay, so be sure to expect that. I'll make another video for that as well. Actually, it's pretty simple to use, but I'll still make one. Okay, so this is our final result. So I don't have any resources for the background, so I just use this. But of course, it's much better if I probably use this darker one. Okay, there we go. So Just play around with these scene and nodes to create to make the scene believable. And of course, the resources that I've told you, be sure to download them. And I guess this is it for the video. And if you have any question, use the comment section and the links in the description of the video. Um, thank you for watching. Be sure to be here for the next one and have a nice day.